Yuna woke in the medical bay with soft light filtering through the windows and the steady beep of monitors, measuring her vital signs. Her throat was raw, and her lungs ached, and her ankle throbbed, where she had injured it during the drop. But she was alive. Jinho was sitting in a chair beside her bed, and he looked like he had not slept since the emergency. When he saw her eyes open, his face broke into a relieved smile. "Welcome back," he said. "How long?" she asked, and her voice came out as a croak. 14 hours, he replied. "The doctor said you inhaled a lot of that gas, but you were going to be fine." He handed her a cup of water, and she drank gratefully. "The others?" she asked. "All safe," Jinho said. "Every single one of them because of you." He leaned back in his chair. "The whole station is talking about what you did, and the Velith, who could not fly, saved 30 lives by crawling through spaces that no one else could reach." Yuna closed her eyes. She had not thought about the irony until that moment. Her malformed wings had been her shame her entire life. But those same wings were flat enough and small enough to let her pass through the maintenance shafts. The very thing that made her defective had made her the only one who could help. "There is someone who wants to see you," Jinho said. "I told him to wait until you were ready, but he has been asking every hour." Yuna looked at him questioningly. "Counselor Ethos." Jinho explained her first instinct was to refuse. She did not want to see the Velith who had spoken about her like she was broken merchandise to be discarded. But something had changed inside her. She was not sure what exactly, but she knew that hiding would not help her understand it. "Send him in," she said. Jinho nodded and stepped outside. A moment later, Counselor Ethos entered the room. He looked different than he had in the consortium offices. His wings were still beautiful, and his robes were still elegant, but the cold authority in his expression had been replaced by something more uncertain. He stood at the foot of her bed, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "I've come to thank you," Ethos said finally. "You saved my life and the lives of my delegation. You would have done the same." Yuna said, though she was not sure if it was true. Ethos shook his head slowly. "No." He admitted, "I do not think I would have." He stepped closer. "I looked at you in that waiting room, and I saw only what was wrong with you. And I did not see the courage or the skill or the willingness to sacrifice yourself for others." His voice was heavy with something that might have been shame. "I offered to send you away to a facility where you would be forgotten, and you responded by risking your life to save mine." He spread his wings slightly in a gesture that Yuna recognized. It was a sign of vulnerability among her people, a symbol of openness and honesty. "I have been thinking about what your humans said," Athos continued, "about how strength is proven by protecting the vulnerable rather than dominating them." He met her eyes. "I have lived my whole life believing that perfection of form reflects perfection of spirit, but you have made me question that belief." He reached into his robes and withdrew a small medallion on a silver chain. "This is a mark of honor from the Velith trade authority," he said. "It is given to those who perform exceptional service to our people." He held it out to her. "I would be honored if you would accept it." Yuna stared at the medallion. It was beautiful and intricately carved, and it represented everything she had been denied her entire life: recognition, acceptance, worth. She could take it and return to Velith space with honor. She could finally prove to her family that she was not the worthless burden they had abandoned. She could have everything she had ever wanted, but as she looked at the medallion, she realized something important. She did not need it anymore. "Thank you, Counselor," she said. "But I cannot accept this." Ethos looked confused. "I do not understand, and this is a great honor." "I know," Yuna said, "but my people cast me aside, and it was a human who chose me." She looked toward the door where she knew Jinho was waiting. "I know where I belong now." Ethos was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "The human is fortunate to have such loyalty." He said, "No," Yuna replied. "I am fortunate that he saw something worth saving." Ethos left with the medallion still in his hand, and Jinho came back in. "I heard some of that," He admitted. Are you sure about your decision? I have never been more sure of anything. Yuna said. She pushed herself up in the bed. When can we leave this station? Jinho laughed. The doctors want to keep you for another day at least. And then we have cargo to deliver and contracts to negotiate and a whole galaxy to explore. He smiled at her. If you are still interested in the job. Yuna felt something warm bloom in her chest. It was not hope this time. It was something stronger. It was certainty. I am interested. She said. 2 days later, the Steadfast undocked from Korvath Station and began its journey toward the next destination. Yuna sat in the co-pilot seat, which Jinho had officially designated as hers. Through the viewport, she could see the stars stretching out in all directions, and each one representing a world she had never seen and an adventure she had never had. Where do you want to go? Jinho asked. It was such a simple question, but for Yuna, it meant everything. For the first time in her life, someone was asking what she wanted. Someone valued her opinion. Someone had chosen her not despite her differences, but without caring about them at all. She looked at the star chart displayed on the console and considered the possibilities. There was a whole universe out there waiting to be discovered, and she was going to see it with someone who believed she was worth something. She pointed to a distant cluster of stars that sparkled like scattered diamonds. There, she said. I want to go there. Jinho nodded and began inputting the coordinates. There it is then. As the Steadfast turned toward the unknown, Yuna leaned back in her seat and smiled. She was not broken. She was not worthless. She was not a burden to be discarded. She was crew. She was family. She was chosen, and that made all the difference. The emergency sirens filled the station with their wailing cry as Jinho and Yuna ran toward Sector 12. Around them, beings of every species were moving in the opposite direction and following the evacuation protocols that had been drilled into every station resident, but Jinho was pushing against the flow. What are you doing? Yuna called out as she struggled to keep up with him. Someone might need help. He shouted back. They reached the security cordon that had been established around the affected sector. Station guards were turning people away, and beyond them, Yuna could see the massive blast doors that had sealed shut to contain the emergency. A security officer stopped them. Sector is locked down, she said. Industrial line ruptured and toxic gas is flooding the residential levels. How many people are trapped? Jinho asked. The officer's expression was grim. At least 30, and including the Velith trade delegation. Yuna felt her heart. C's counselor Ethos and his people were in there. The same beings who had looked at her with disgust just minutes ago were now trapped and dying. What is being done? Jinho demanded. We are working on it, the officer said. But the blast doors cannot be opened until the gas is cleared, and the main environmental controls are in the contaminated zone. She shook her head. Our teams cannot reach them in time. Jinho turned to study the sector map displayed on a nearby terminal. Yuna watched him trace the corridors with his eyes and then stop at something. What about the maintenance shafts? He asked. Too small, the officer replied. We already checked, and none of our personnel can fit through them. Yuna looked at the map. She knew maintenance shafts. She had spent years crawling through spaces that others could not reach. The passages shown on the map were narrow and twisted and full of obstacles. They would be impossible for most species, but not for her. I can do it, she said. Everyone turned to look at her. What? Jinho said. I can fit through those shafts, Yuna said, and her voice was steadier than she felt. I know maintenance systems, and I have been crawling through tight spaces my whole life. She touched her malformed wings. These are flat enough to let me pass where others cannot. Jinho shook his head immediately. No, and it is too dangerous. There is no other way. Yuna said. She is right, the security officer admitted reluctantly. But the risk is enormous, and one wrong turn, and she would be trapped in a space filling with poison. Yuna looked at Jinho. You told me that strength is proven by protecting the vulnerable. she said. "Those people in there are vulnerable now, and I can help them." She took a deep breath. "Let me prove that I am worth something." Jinho's face was torn with conflict. He wanted to protect her. She could see it in his eyes, but he also knew that she was right. "I will guide you through the comes," he said finally. "Every step of the way, and if anything goes wrong, you turn back immediately." Yuna nodded. The security officer led them to a maintenance access point near the sealed sector. The shaft opening was barely half a meter wide, and it disappeared into darkness. Yuna removed her jacket and took the small device that Jinho pressed into her hand. "Be careful," he said, and his voice was rough with worry. "I will," she promised. Then she crawled into the darkness. The shaft was tighter than she had expected. She had to move on her stomach and pull herself forward with her arms while her useless wings scraped against the metal walls. The air was hot and stale, and she could hear the distant hiss of the gas leak. Somewhere ahead, turn left at the next junction. Jinho's voice crackled through the She turned and found herself in an even, narrower passage. Her shoulders barely fit, and she had to angle her body sideways to squeeze through. The walls pressed against her from all sides. Fear tried to rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. People were dying. She did not have time to be afraid. "There is a vertical shaft coming up," Jinho said. "You will need to climb down about 10 meters. She reached the shaft and looked down into blackness. There were maintenance rungs set into the wall, but they were slick with condensation, and the space was so tight that she could barely move her arms. She began to descend one rung at a time. Her muscles burned and her hands cramped, and twice she nearly lost her grip, but she kept going. At the bottom, she found herself in a horizontal passage that ran directly above the environmental control room. Through the grating beneath her, she could see the machinery, and beyond it, the sealed room where the Veloth were trapped. She could also see the green-tinged gas that was slowly filling the space. "I can see the controls," she reported. "Good," Jinho said. "There should be an access panel about 3 meters ahead, and you need to remove it and drop down into the room." She crawled forward and found the panel. Her fingers fumbled with the release catches, but finally, it came loose. The drop was further than she expected, and she landed hard on the metal floor. Pain shot through her ankle, but she forced herself to stand. The gas was thicker here, and her eyes burned, and her lungs protested every breath. "Find the main ventilation console," Jinho instructed. "It should be a blue panel on the east wall." She stumbled through the haze and found it. The controls were unfamiliar, but Jinho walked her through each step. Reroute the intake valves, close the damaged line, activate the emergency purifiers. Her vision was blurring and her hands were shaking, but she followed his instructions precisely. With a final command, the purifiers roared to life. Clean air began to flood the system through the windows. She could see the green gas being pushed back, retreating, disappearing. "It is working," she gasped into the "The blast doors are unlocking," Jinho reported, and she could hear the relief in his voice. "Emergency teams are moving in." Yuna slumped against the console. Her body felt like it was made of lead, and every breath was agony. But she had done it. She had saved them. The rescue teams found her barely conscious on the floor of the control room. They carried her out on a stretcher, and she caught glimpses of the Veloth being led to safety. Counselor Ethos was among them. His perfect wings were drooping, and his face was pale with shock. As she was carried past him, their eyes met. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Then the medical teams took over, and everything became a blur of lights and voices and the gentle darkness of exhaustion pulling her under. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness claimed her was Jinho's voice telling her she had done well. She had done so well. The commercial district of Korvath Station was filled with light and noise and beings from dozens of different worlds. Yuna walked beside Jinho with her head down and her malformed wings pressed flat against her back. She had worn a loose jacket. to try to hide them, but she knew it was not enough. Her kind could always tell. The consortium offices were located in the upper levels of the station, where the corridors were wider and the lighting was softer and the air smelled of expensive filtration systems. This was where the powerful conducted their business. Yuna felt terribly out of place. They were waiting in a reception area when the Velith arrived. There were 5 of them, and they moved with the effortless grace that Yuna had always envied. Their wings caught the light and shimmered with colors that seemed to shift and flow like water. They were beautiful in a way that made Yuna want to disappear. The leader of the delegation was an older male with silver patterns on his wings and an expression of cool authority. He wore the formal robes of a high counselor and carried himself with the certainty of someone who had never been told he was worthless. His name, as Yuna would later learn, was Counselor Ethos. He noticed Yuna almost immediately. His eyes found her wings, and his expression shifted from curiosity to recognition to something that looked almost like disgust. He leaned close to one of his aides and whispered something, and the aide glanced at Yuna with poorly hidden contempt. Yuna felt her face burn with shame. Jinho noticed the exchange, and his jaw tightened. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "I cannot," Yuna whispered back. "They are my people, and they see what I am." Before Jinho could respond, Counselor Ethos approached them. His wings spread slightly in a gesture of dominance that Yuna recognized from her childhood. "Human?" he said in a voice that was polite but cold. "I am Counselor Ethos of the Velith Trade Authority, and I believe we are here for the same negotiations." "Park Jinho," Jinho replied with a nod. "Independent trader." Ethos glanced at Yuna again. "I see you have acquired a Velith attendant," he said. "Though I must say your choice is unusual. She is my crew member," Jinho said. "Not my attendant, of course," Ethos said with a thin smile that suggested he did not believe it. "Still, I find myself curious how such a specimen came to be in your service." Yuna flinched at the word specimen. It was a term used for animals or objects, not for people. Jinho stepped forward slightly. "Her name is Yuna," he said, and his voice had grown harder. "And I would appreciate it if you spoke about her with respect." Ethos raised an eyebrow. "Respect," he repeated as if the concept amused him. "Human, I am not sure you understand the situation, and I am trying to help you." He lowered his voice as if sharing a confidence. "This female is defective, and among our people, such individuals are typically placed in care facilities, where they can be looked after properly." He gestured to his aides. "I would be willing to take her off your hands as a gesture of goodwill between our peoples, and she would be sent somewhere appropriate for her condition." Yuna felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. A care facility. She knew what that meant. It was where the Velith sent their broken ones to live out their lives in quiet isolation, far from the eyes of proper society. It was a fate worse than death, a slow erasure of everything you were until nothing remained, but a body that no one wanted to remember. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Jinho spoke instead. "No," he said, and his voice was like ice. Ethos blinked in surprise. "I beg your pardon." "I said no," Jinho repeated. "Yuna is my crew, and she is my responsibility, and she is my friend." He stepped closer to Ethos, and though he was shorter than the Velith, he seemed somehow larger in that moment. "She is not defective, and she is not a burden, and she is not something to be disposed of." His eyes were hard. "And if you ever speak about her like that again, we are going to have a very different kind of conversation." The reception area had gone silent. Everyone was watching the Velith delegation looked scandalized, and the other beings in the room whispered to each other. And somewhere a recording device was probably capturing the whole scene. Ethos drew himself up with offended dignity. "You presume to lecture me about one of my own kind," he demanded. "I presume to defend someone who cannot defend herself," Jinho replied. "Where I come from, that is not an insult, and it is a duty." The confrontation might have escalated further, but a consortium representative appeared to announce that the negotiations were ready to begin. Ethos gave Jinho one last cold look and swept away with his delegation. The moment they were alone, Yuna grabbed Jinho's arm. "Why did you do that?" she asked, and her voice was shaking. "You made an enemy of a high counselor, and for what? For you," Jinho said simply. "I'm not worth it." Yuna insisted. "He was right about what I am." Jinho turned to face her fully. "He was wrong," he said. "He was wrong about everything." He put his hands on her shoulders. "Yuna, I know you have spent your whole life being told that you are worthless, and I know those voices are hard to silence." His eyes were kind. "But where I come from, we believe something different, and we believe that how you treat the vulnerable reveals who you really are." He smiled. "Strength is not proven by dominating the weak, and it is proven by protecting them." Yuna felt tears prick her eyes. "Why do humans think like this?" she asked. "Because we have been the vulnerable ones too," Jinho said. "Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy, or the fastest, or the most advanced, but we survived anyway." He shrugged. "Maybe that taught us something about the value of those who struggle." A station announcement interrupted them. "Emergency alert. Emergency alert. All personnel report to emergency stations. Life support malfunction detected in Sector 12. Repeat life support malfunction in Sector 12. Jinho." And Yuna exchanged looks. "That is the residential sector," Yuna said. "The Velith delegation is housed there." Through the windows they could see warning lights beginning to flash in the distance. Something was very wrong. The Steadfast was not a beautiful ship. Her hull was scarred from years of traveling through asteroid fields, and her paint was faded, and her engines made strange noises that Jinho insisted were perfectly normal. But to Yuna, she was the most wonderful thing in the galaxy. For the first time in her life, she had a room of her own. It was small, and the bed was narrow, and the walls were plain metal, but it was hers. She did not have to share it with maintenance pipes or worry about being discovered. By station security, she could close the door and be alone, and that was a luxury she had never known. The first few weeks aboard the ship were difficult. Yuna worked constantly, and she worked hard, and she barely slept because she was waiting for Jinho to reveal his true intentions, waiting for the moment when he would demand payment for his kindness, waiting for the cruelty that she was certain would come. It always came, but days turned into weeks and weeks, turned into a month, and the cruelty never arrived. Jinho treated her the same way every day. He was patient when she made mistakes, and encouraging when she learned something new, and respectful of her space and her silence. He never commented on her wings or asked intrusive questions about her past. He simply accepted her as she was. This confused Yuna more than anything. One evening, as they traveled through hyperspace toward their next destination, Jinho found her in the cargo bay, organizing supplies that did not need organizing. "You should rest," he said gently. "You have been working for 16 hours. "I am fine," she replied without looking up. "There is more to do." "Yuna." Something in his voice made her stop. She turned to face him and saw concern in his eyes. "You do not need to prove yourself to me," he said. "You have the job, and I am not going to take it away." "Everyone takes things away," she said quietly. "That is how the universe works." Jinho sat down on a cargo crate and gestured for her to join him. After a long hesitation, she did. "Tell me about your people," he said. "Tell me about the Velith." Yuna was silent for a moment. "We are known for our wings," she said finally. "They are considered the most beautiful feature of our species, and they allow us to move through zero gravity with grace that other species cannot match." She paused, and her hands clenched in her lap. "Among my people, physical perfection is tied to spiritual worth," she continued. "A beautiful body reflects a beautiful soul, and a broken body reflects a broken soul." "And your wings?" Jinho asked gently. "They never develop properly." Yuna said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. The healers said, "It happened before I was born, and there was nothing they could do." She took a shaky breath. My family tried to hide me at first, but as I grew older, it became impossible, and people started to talk, and my parents were ashamed. The memories came flooding back, her mother refusing to look at her, her father speaking to her only when necessary, her siblings running away when she approached, as if her condition was something they could catch. They left me at Nexus 7 when I was 12 years old. She said, "My father told me I was old enough to take care of myself, and that it would be better for everyone if I made my own way." She looked at Jinho with eyes that glistened with tears she refused to shed. I never saw them again. Jinho was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to a storage locker on the far wall. He opened it and removed something, and when he turned around, Yuna saw that he was holding a metal rod. No, not a rod, a leg. "I lost my leg in a mining accident 15 years ago," he said. A support beam collapsed and crushed it beyond repair. He rolled up his pants leg, and Yuna saw the prosthetic limb that replaced his real one. It was simple and functional and bore the marks of many repairs. The galaxy has technology that could make this look and feel like a real leg, he said. "I could get synthetic skin and nerve interfaces, and no one would ever know the difference." "Why do you not?" Yuna asked. Jinho smiled and sat back down beside her. "Because I want to remember," he said. "I want to remember that I survived something terrible and came out the other side." He tapped the metal leg. "This does not make me broken, Yuna, and it does not mean my soul is damaged, and it does not define who I am." He looked at her with kindness and understanding. "Your wings do not define you either." Yuna wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe it so badly that it hurt. But she had spent her entire life being told that she was worthless and defective, and those voices were hard to silence. "I do not know how to believe that," she admitted. "You do not have to believe it today," Jinho said. "But maybe someday you will, and until then, I will believe it enough for both of us." The ship's computer chimed to announce that they would be dropping out of hyperspace soon. Jinho stood up and offered her his hand. "Come on," he said. "We have a delivery to make at Korvat Station, and I want to show you how to negotiate with difficult buyers." Yuna took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. As they walked toward the cockpit, she realized that something had shifted. Inside her, the wall she had built around her heart had developed a small crack. It was terrifying, but it also felt like the beginning of something new. Korvat Station appeared in the viewport as they dropped out of hyperspace. It was larger than Nexus 7 and busier, and Jinho explained that it was a major hub for trade negotiations between several galactic powers. "There is a Velith delegation here," he said as they prepared for docking. "They are negotiating mineral rights with a consortium that I also need to speak with." Yuna felt her body go rigid. "Velith," she repeated. "Yes," Jinho said, and then he noticed her expression. "Is that a problem?" Yuna stared at the station growing larger in the viewport. Somewhere in there were members of her own species. People who would look at her wings and see her shame. People who would wonder why a human kept such a defective creature around. "I can stay on the ship," she said quickly. "You do not need me for this meeting." Jinho shook his head. "You are my crew, Yuna, and I need you with me." He put a hand on her shoulder. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." She wanted to believe him. But as the docking clamps engaged and the airlock pressurized, she could not stop her hands from trembling. The Velith were here, and she was not ready to face them. The cleaning drone had broken down again, and Yuna knew what that meant. She would have to crawl into the waste recycler herself and clear the blockage by hand while the station supervisor watched with cold eyes and tapping feet. This was her life. On Nexus 7, the trading station hung like a jewel in the darkness between stars, and thousands of beings passed through its corridors every day. Merchants and diplomats and travelers from 100 different worlds walked beneath the gleaming lights, and conducted their business. None of them noticed the small Velith female in the gray maintenance uniform who scrubbed the floors and cleaned the pipes and lived in a forgotten corner of the station. The Velith were known throughout the galaxy for their beauty. Their bodies were slender and graceful, and their skin shimmered with soft bioluminescence. But their most striking feature was their wings, delicate and translucent and strong enough to carry them through zero-gravity environments. With movements that other species described as dancing, Yuna had wings too, but hers had never developed properly. They hung from her back like crumpled paper, and the left one was shorter than the right, and neither of them could lift her even a centimeter off the ground. Among her people, this made her worthless. She remembered the day her family had left her here. Her mother had not looked back, and her siblings had pretended she did not exist, and her father had handed her a small bag with a few credits and some clothes and told her to make her own way. She had been barely more than a child. That was 8 years ago, and she had survived by taking the jobs that no one else wanted, cleaning waste systems and scrubbing cargo holds and crawling into spaces too small and too dangerous for anyone else. The other Velith who passed through Nexus 7 always looked away when they saw her. Some of them made signs of warding as if her condition might be contagious. The station residents treated her as invisible at best and as a nuisance at worst. She had learned to expect nothing from anyone tonight. She was finishing her shift in the lower commercial district, where the bars and entertainment venues drew rowdy crowds. She kept her head down and moved along the wall and tried not to draw attention to herself. But luck was not with her. A group of Krethian traders stumbled out of a drinking establishment, and one of them crashed directly into her. She fell hard against the tenth metal floor, and her cleaning supplies scattered everywhere. The Krethians were large beings with thick scaled skin, and they had clearly consumed too much alcohol. One of them looked down at her and laughed. "Look at this little broken thing," he said in a slurred voice. His companions gathered around, and Yuna tried to gather her supplies and escape, but a heavy foot came down on her hand. "Nose wings," another Krethian said with mock sympathy. "Did someone step on them when you were young?" They laughed, and one of them grabbed her wing and pulled hard enough to make her cry out in pain. Defective merchandise. The first one declared, "Someone should throw this one in the recycler." Yuna closed her eyes and waited for more pain. This was not the first time something like this had happened, and it would not be the last. Around her. She could hear the footsteps of other station residents walking past and pretending not to see. No one ever stopped. No one ever helped. Let her go. The voice was calm but firm, and it spoke in the common galactic tongue with an accent Yuna did not recognize. She opened her eyes and saw a human standing a few meters away. He was average height for his species, with dark hair and weathered features that suggested he had spent many years traveling the stars. His clothes were practical and worn, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen trouble before and was not afraid of it. The Krethians turned to face him with expressions of disbelief. "Mind your own business, human." The leader growled. "This is my business." The human replied without raising his voice. "You are hurting someone who cannot defend herself, and I am asking you to stop." "Asking," the Krethian repeated with a sneer. "And if we choose not to stop?" The human smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then I will have to insist." Something in his tone made the Krethians hesitate. Humans had a reputation in the galaxy. They were not the strongest species or the fastest or the most technologically advanced, but they were known for being unpredictable and stubborn and surprisingly dangerous when provoked. The Krethians exchanged glances, and then the leader made a dismissive gesture. "Keep your broken toy, human," he said. "She is not worth the trouble." They walked away laughing and making crude jokes, and Yuna stayed on the floor with her scattered supplies and her racing heart. The human walked over and knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. Yuna flinched away from him. Kindness always came with a price. She had learned that lesson many times. I am fine, she whispered without meeting his eyes. Thank you for your help, but I do not need anything from you. You are bleeding, he said, and pointed to her hand where the Crethian had stepped on it. She looked down and saw that he was right. The scales had cut her skin and blue velvet blood was dripping onto the floor. It is nothing, she said. The human reached into his jacket and pulled out a small medical kit. He opened it and held out a bandage. At least let me help with this, he said. My name is Park Jin-ho, and I'm just a cargo hauler passing through the station. Yuna stared at the offered bandage for a long moment. She could not remember the last time someone had offered her help without expecting something in return. Slowly she reached out and took it. I am Yuna, she said quietly. Jin-ho helped her wrap the bandage around her wounded hand, and then he helped her gather her scattered cleaning supplies. He did not ask about her wings, or make comments about her appearance, or treat her like she was something broken and shameful. He just talked to her like she was a normal person. It was the strangest thing that had happened to her in years. Do you work here on the station? He asked as they walked together toward the maintenance corridors. Yes, she said. I clean things and fix things and do whatever jobs no one else wants. That sounds like hard work. It is work, she said simply. It keeps me alive. Jin-ho nodded and seemed to consider something. My ship is docked here for repairs, he said. The Steadfast is her name, and she's not much to look at, but she gets me where I need to go. Yuna wondered why he was telling her this. I have been looking for a crew member, Jin-ho continued. Someone who knows how stations work, and can handle maintenance, and is not afraid of hard labor. He stopped walking and turned to face her. Would you be interested in the job? Yuna stared at him with complete incomprehension. Why? She asked. Why what? Why would you offer me a job? She said, and her voice cracked slightly. You can see what I am. Jin-ho looked at her for a long moment. I see someone who works hard and survives despite everything, he said. I see someone who's been treated badly and still keeps going. He shrugged. I need someone reliable, and you seem reliable to me. Yuna wanted to believe him, but 8 years of abandonment and cruelty had taught her that kindness was always a trap. You do not want me, she said. No one wants the broken one. Jin-ho smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. Then let me be the first, he said, and held out his hand. What do you say, Yuna? She looked at his outstretched hand and felt something she had not felt. In Year's Hope it was terrifying, but she reached out and took his hand anyway.